Oh,
So
sorry.
for those who don't know me, Jason Miller. I'm also presenting with Misi. He's right over there on my screen. Um, and we're presenting a tool that he's built. Misi, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I will just briefly say some words before you take it off. I'm a kind of an old-time remedy consultant, and in the old days there were no archiving solutions in BMC, so I built a archiving tool and which I've posted for free on my website. But now there's archiving in Remedy built in, so most people use it for data migrations, Delta data migrations, and backing up data to ARX files or transferring data between systems and so on. I'm not so good at ITSM, so I'm very glad that Jason here will help provide you with some solutions that he made using archive for ITSM and configuration data. I just can add also that this tool is using pure C API, connects to the Remedy server and retrieves and imports data. That's the only thing it does. Compares two systems and then transfers the data that is not matched. In earlier on, the only thing to use to compare the data was the request ID, but I have recently added the possibility to use other primary keys than the request ID, for instance, the due ID field or things like this. So that's it. So over to Jason. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Misi.
And hey, Jason,
go ahead.
Jason, let me just add something here for those people who are, I mean, you and I, we've been through rehearsal with this, me and you and Misi, but one of the things that I asked you in rehearsal or on the video we did was what problem this solves. And I'll tell you that I did some work for a customer on the East Coast once, and they said, hey, development and production are exactly the same. We have exactly the same groups and exactly the same field IDs, exactly the same scheme IDs. I'm like, really? Because nobody else does. Okay, great, no problem. We don't want you to access production. I said, well, my stuff's ready to move. Let me migrate it, and so I exported it, imported it, and then lo and behold, we had made some changes in the lower environments that were not in the production environment. So guess what? My code clobbered field IDs, my code, when I imported, it would break things basically, because as you have said, people don't always keep all the environments the same because you're working in production, for service delivery and support, but you're doing development. And so I think what this does for me is now if I'm in that situation again, and I do some new work in development, I can move it to production and it won't overwrite the data that's there and it'll keep what's there. Is that what this is, where you're going to show with this tool, Jason?
Yeah, so just to clarify real quick, because you mentioned definitions. This doesn't do anything with definitions, fields, in the definition itself. It's purely data. So it will synchronize data between systems or forms or out to an ARX file. But the process to keep your definitions in order between your environments still has to exist. But assuming your organization is good with that, or your customer is good with that, this tool is great for the data side. So you did touch on it and so here's the scenario I built, just like you said, and I've actually lived this when I owned three environments, dev, QA, and test, or prod, treat it like test sometimes, my team would have other teams manage various bits of data. Service desk might manage people and categorization, whatever. Some groups, they would have managed their own support group members. We managed the framework, the architecture. Other people managed a lot of the data. However, that had an impact when we were doing development and QA testing, because if those groups were not in those lower level systems, if the people were not there, we ran into issues. So that's where I started using this to sync my foundation data from prod back down to make sure, instead of doing a whole database refresh, which most people tend to do. The other use case that Phil mentioned, and I don't have on the slide here, but I have had a customer use this for an upgrade from 8.1 to 20.02. And the scripts that I'm going to be showing, and we will share these with everybody, they were from that project. So I gave them the scripts and they ran it from their 8.1 system to their 2002 to bring over their foundation data and ticket their incident information. So that's the quick summary. I'm building the slideshow for the download for anybody who doesn't, see the video. So I'm giving some context, but really I'm going to jump into the live demo here. So here we go. Excuse me. We've got my two systems here. And so on the left, this is my QA. On the right, this is my coworker's system, and we're calling this prod. You can see that we have different companies in here. Here I have Awesome Aerospace in QA. We were doing some development work. That's kind of stalled, but it's there. And here we have Fincher's FBI Factory and GeekWorks. So these are our production groups that were created by other teams, and I need to get those into QA. And along with those, you can see that they both have locations, they have organizations, support groups, people. If we pop open one of, let's see, yeah. So we've got 176 people here. We have 2 people here. If we look at our people, we can see that they also have groups and roles and other records. This person has an attribute, some work info notes. They have their login information, support groups, and they have roles. So we've got the full thing. These are the things that most people manually have to, create in all their levels if they don't do the database refreshes or synchronize. So let's jump in. Now, this is QA. We got our Awesome Aerospace here, and that was something that was in active development. So we want to keep it in case we need it later. So that's where we're going to show a archive of the tool. So I've got my server set up here. Here's where our archive files are going to go. I'm creating some logs, and here are the config files, and these will share. So real quick, we'll pop one of these open. And I am going to run these in a specific order because you want your company and organization data there before you bring over people and groups, locations. So there is a specific order for this. I'm throwing categorization in here as well because that's also a piece that tends to get very out of sync between production and the lower environments. So, these are pretty straightforward. Your credentials, what server, the source server, the target server. Here's the list of forms we're synchronizing, some different options. And the key piece for backing up is this, where is it here? Target directory. So right here, I don't have a target server, I have a target directory, and this is going to create ARX files for us. So let's just go ahead and jump in and do that. Let me come over to my presentation. I'm just going to take these commands straight from the slideshow, copy that into my clipboard, paste it, and run. So in the background, you can see, so here's our ARX files. And again, this is my QA copy just as a safety net before I sync. And so you can see here, I use Beartail. If you're not familiar with it, great tool for Windows. You can live tail log files like you would in Linux. And you can see that there were, on the company alias, there were 22 records. So it gives you some statistics of what it's doing. Now, personally, this is something I started doing a long time ago. It's just hair redundant, but I send my output to another log file. And that way, a week or 2 later, when I went, oh, how did that run? Were the, any of the specifics, I just have extra log files to look at. If you don't do that, it shows up live on the screen, and we'll actually see that in a moment. So let's see, let's go ahead, and I'm going to back up the next form. And you can see we've got the form. We should have more files. Yep. Let's see, that was categorization. So yeah, all our PCT forms are coming over. Let me grab the next one. And now this is our people relationships, support group associations, their notification preferences. And you can see that's now backed up too. So we're good. We know we can recover if we need to. If anybody says, hey, I built this group in QA and I really need it back, we've got it. So a little more.
What's the IDX file again?
Well, Mishi, actually, you want to explain that since you're the developer?
Well, the ARX file or the
IDX.
The IDX, it's an index file. Well, you can do delta updates of these ARX files, and then it will add to the end and kind of remove rows in the middle. And the IDX files is to give a quick reference for archive to find the place in the ARX file for the records. So it's a little bit, if you delete them, it's no problem. If you have them there and have millions of records in an ARX file, it will be much quicker. So
there was a question, Mishi and Jason, there was a question in the chat. Richard Thomas asked a question about whether it updates the user license association as well.
Yes, asterisk. So in my environment, I'm going from my production. I thought it was a little more current version. It is a 9102, and my QA, what we're using as QA, is a 1908. The bundle licenses are not in the 9102 system, so I removed those from the script. However, I have run it with that, so the bundle licensing also comes over. So I can't demonstrate it in this time, but in the files I provide, I will include that form back in there.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions before we go on?
There's a question from Mohammed. He says it will back up everything. Oh, what's the question? Will it back up everything, or is there a qualification to back up? I think is the question.
Yep, so there is a qualification. And as you can see here, we have the good old 1 = 1. So I'm just getting around the requirement of a qualification, but you can specify. So if you only wanted to bring over records for a certain company, or if you're doing categorization, you only wanted to back up hardware, say, you know, OpCat hardware, you can do that. Now, in these cases, I'm doing everything. I will actually show a qualification one when we get to the new primary key feature. But for the main 6 scripts we have 3 backing up ITSM data, and then we have 3 to migrate ITSM data. Those are all just 1 = 1. So let's see here. So back to our system. So nothing's happened here if I refresh, because I just backed up. So let's make something happen. Okay, before we do that, you know what, okay. So here's one variation of the command. As I mentioned before, I like to pipe these to a file. I'm not going to do that in this one because I'm going to interact with the command prompt in case you don't want to save your credentials in a file. So that is a feature available. And this is our first one. So I'm going to change, actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to go over to the synchronized scripts, and I am going to set the password to prompt, uppercase prompt. And I am also going to, if I can spell, tell this to use the source values from up here for the username and password. So this is an easy way to not store the credentials if you're in an environment where you can't do that. So we pop that in, and you can see that it's prompting for a password. Now, before I put in the right password, I'm going to put in a bad password just to show the logging real quick. You can see authentication failed. So in your main file, your log file, it's giving you the error messages. So if you're having a problem connecting, that will be shown here. So let's go ahead and run it again with the right password. RRR password. Oops, I don't think I typed it right. RRR password, super secure. And is my cap locks on? I think when I took my VM snapshot, yep, my cap locks were on. So I got to remember to turn them off. Let's do that again. RRR password. There we go. So I'm not redirecting my output to a file, so we can see it here live on the screen. And you know, it's really a preference thing. I just historically I've come across, I'm like, I wanted to see that file, what was on my screen. So that's why I direct it to a file, but that's optional. And so it's given you, status. You can see it live scrolling by in the background as well. Now, this is our first run of foundation data. So it's the companies, organizations, the real kind of key core foundation data, if you will. So if we come over here and do a refresh, we can see Awesome Aerospace is gone in my QA environment. And we now have Fincher's FBI Factory and Geekworks. We have 29 and 29. Now, like we mentioned before, you put a qualification in there, so we could have been a little more targeted with this. The other thing to point out that this is the traditional way to use the tool. It's all based on field ID 1, request ID. So if we look at the request IDs, they're identical because that's what it's using to identify the records between the environments. We're going to show a newer option in just a few minutes. But if we click through, we can see the locations. Oh, wrong one. So we have the same locations, we have the same organizations. We do not have the same people because that hasn't happened yet. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to jump here. I'm going to go ahead and start piping back to my log file.
Hey, Misi and Jason, Cade asks the question. He says, what capabilities does this give that the Delta Data Migrator or the Helix Data Migrator don't have?
For one, it will also delete records that are not in the. If you compare the Delta Data Migrator, it doesn't delete records, but this tool will delete records that are not in the source environment, for instance. And it's pretty fast to do the Delta data migration. If you transfer all the incident in a huge system, it will take a long time. But the next time you run it, it will be pretty fast.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
It's really easy too, Merrick says.
Yeah, it is, and it is very, very fast. I don't have any production experience with the Delta Data Migrator or the newer CMT tools, so this has been my fallback for many years, and I just go to this. It works.
I mean, the CMT is this is the one that goes on the database level, right?
Yes, correct.
And it's of course it's much faster, but because we use the remedy, the ER system API, the RPC calls through the remedy servers, we have not really any problem with the version differences and stuff like this, except if fields are added or deleted, they will you will get maybe errors in this log files and things like that, so you can handle it. But if you go on the database level, you have to be more understand the differences maybe between the systems.
Yeah, certainly.
Merrick says you don't need another namespace in the databases as you would with the Helix Data Migrator.
And that's a good point, because Helix Data Migrator will cache everything to a file and then eventually send that to your target. This is directly between the two servers, so you're skipping that step. So you don't need as much, you don't need any extra disk space, where I've heard Helix Data Migrator, somebody recently told me you went about three times your database because you're going to have multiple runs and variations of data. So you want to make sure you have lots of room for that, which this does not require.
Well, Jason, in the current configuration that you're running, where you're doing the export as one set with your destination as an ARX file and then import into the other system, you are doing the dump to flat file and the import from flat file as well.
No, and I'm sorry if I wasn't very clear about that. I backed up my QA records, but these scripts are going directly between servers.
Okay, the destination is directly, okay.
Yep. Yeah, so if we look at one of these, you can see I'm connecting to my remedy prod, and I am then going straight to my remedy QA, where the backups, I was going to target directory. That was just dumping the data. These are going live between the servers. So that, yeah, that was just a a scenario to keep what I had in QA just in case I need it later. Let's see here. So the last one I did was categorization. Oh, I didn't actually show the differences in categorization. Can I move? Yeah, let me move that zoom bar. So let's see. Actually, I had it cached. So you can see categorization wise, product cats. My prod had 169. My QA had 298. If I refresh, we now match. Perfect copy of our production environment. So let's go ahead and do the people, because that gets a little more interesting. And that's people data is one of those areas that changes the most frequently. So let's go ahead and do that. And this one does take a smidge longer than the others. While that's running, we can look at my people in QA. You can see I have 179 people in QA. I have 17 in our prod. That's probably backwards from a real life scenario, but you know, I keep all my rock stars in QA. We don't let them into prod.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Now, one thing I'm also doing is in the scripts, I'm disabling the filters because I don't want anything to run. I want, and you can see here, where is it? Let's go to the people. That's the one we're running. You can see disable delete filters and disable merge filters are yes. I don't want anything to happen. I don't want my remedy system to do anything for me. I want the data just as it is in the source system. That should be done. It is. So now
how does it handle associations?
It's not really association aware. So I guess it doesn't. So if you have enforced associations, that might trigger off some stuff.
Yeah, and that originally we wanted to include because there is the new feature to use a GUID or a what's it called, Misi?
Primary key or
primary key. Thank you. Or a set of multiple fields to do that. We were hoping to originally show that, but when Misi and I start talking about it, there wasn't a good way to say I brought over this person, and here are go look up. There is not a good way. There's no way to do it currently to bring over the associations related to that person. So we ended up scrapping that, and so this is all using field ID 1. It's basically we're doing mirrors at the moment. I do have a quick demo though of that new feature, but I wasn't able to do it in ITSM for that reason. So let's see here. So I refreshed my QA. You can see my people now match. And let's see, we were looking at our FBI people earlier. So we can now see that we have their attributes. Let's see, FBI Joe. We've got the same attributes, same work info. I'm not doing any assets, but we could easily do those associations as well. Support groups. So here's the one piece. So the access restrictions come over. In these scripts currently, you can see I don't have bundled licenses because this is an older environment, but I will include that in the files. You just have to remove it if you're coming from an older system. And we've got their support groups and their roles. So my QA environment is pretty well mirrored from my production now. I didn't do any transactional data, any incidents, work orders, any other work logs, but I have done that in the past. It works. Like LJ had mentioned, though, we can't target, bring over incident A and then go get its related records. There's no way to do that at this time. And I don't know if that's probably not even on your roadmap.
Well,
because it's
it's on my roadmap, but new features now requires a sponsor of some kind because there is too little. I do too little field work myself, and so it doesn't give me the benefits myself. So I have to have something, but
like in this situation, people and the related, organizations, support groups and all that sort of stuff. So if the relationships you need to bring over, you just build the config file. The piece that RRRchive isn't providing is the way to automatically say, I want to pull over help desk, go get all the associated forms and bring that config in. It'll do it if you know what they are, but it's not automatically generating.
It's easy if you move everything over. Then it's just to move everything from all the forms. But if you want to do a subset of, I don't know, incidents and then have the work logs related to those incidents, there is not really a straightforward way to do it with the tool. So it's focusing on one regular form at a time. So
exactly. It's going between the forms directly. It doesn't have the ability to do a subquery, basically. Give me an incident, and now let's go find all the work logs and attachments, you know, all the related changes. It just doesn't have that ability.
Speaking of attachments, does it bring attachments over as well?
Yes, it does.
Awesome.
Yep. You know what? I don't have one in my demo. I think I was going to add that in the work info, but I didn't end up doing that. No, but it would have, if I had an attachment in here, it would have brought that over. And actually, well, let's see, just to show I'm not lying, we can do that. And we can run it. And the cool thing about running it again, Misi had said before, it's going to be a delta. So it's not going to evaluate everything. It's only going to look for what's changed and only bring that over. So let's see, save that. Oh, what? Oh, okay. It's a new work info. New record. All right, let's kick it off again. And it should run a lot faster this time. There we go, finished. And we have our attachment right there. So very good. Thank you for asking, LJ. Because that is a key piece. Attachments can sometimes be a real bear between systems.
Rick asks, Rick says he used it to migrate data during his 7 to 9 upgrade, and it definitely brought over the attachments. And then Mohammed says, asks if it'll update the AR schema next ID counter on the forms.
I can say it because it uses the API. If you merge records into a system, it will update all those regular forms. But you have these counter tables that don't contain any records in ITSM. Yep. Right? And because there is no record to migrate, it will actually not upgrade the next ID in the AR schema table for those forms. So that is something you have to look at manually if you're transferring incidents, for instance.
Yep. And so, and I'm not demoing this script, but it was proven at one point for that 8.1 to 2002 upgrade I had mentioned earlier. You can see I'm bringing over the ticket generators, and that's going to take care of it for us. So in that case where we were bringing incidents over, it cleared out anything that had been done prior to our synchronizing, because they did some testing and whatnot prior to go live. And by doing that, it also updated our incident IDs.
Oh, cool.
So the last thing I have to show is the primary key that we were talking about. So I went ahead and I just built a quick form, and you can see we have our remedy QA where it originated, remedy prod. So this is, you know, some records have made it over here over time. These leave-in QAs, don't want to touch them. I want to leave them alone. Overwrite from prod, that could come over. One interesting thing, and Misi, I just found this out recently, so correct me if I'm wrong. And actually let me bring up the definition here, the config file. So what I'm doing here is the upper portion's all the same, but what's different is I have a qualification saying the environment note is not leave in QA. I don't want to overwrite those. And my environment note is not do not sync. And I have one of those in my production that I don't want to go to QA. And this could be any qualification that makes sense. I just wanted to do this for demo purposes. And so here's the primary key. So this is the new magic. And this hasn't been there until very recently, because everything used to be based on request ID, field 1. That's how it synced. Well, I've got it looking at the environment, the ENV originating, and the short description. The reason I did the short description, this is my own little convention. I usually put the keyword. I rarely use it for production, any kind of data, but it's required. So I put server keyword and the version. And that way, when I look at this record in 5 years, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that system. A little bit of nostalgia, but because it's going to be unique per environment, I'm using that. So let's go ahead and run that. So real quick, so we've got here, oh, so Misi, I kind of got distracted. So I am comparing environment note, and the null ones, nothing happens with those. And I'm figuring that's because I listed it as a primary key, and the code is saying, if it's null, ignore it. Is that true, Misi?
Well, it's one of the primary keys are, the primary key was two fields. So if one is null,
yep.
I don't know.
Well, we'll show it. So
Okay.
real quick, just again, so the primary keys are the ENV originating and the notes. So in this case, record 8 in QA is null notes, and record 3 in prod is also null. And just real quick to look at our primary key one more time. Here is ENV originating and, oh, I'm sorry, I'm using short description. That was my original demo, and I changed from that. So I may have been telling you complete falsities. Anyways, let's run this. So let's see here, screenshots. Here is my command for running that script. And we'll go ahead and pop that in there. And did you do it already? Yep, okay, yeah, there's only 6 records in the source, so it was really fast. So before I refresh, here's a quick look. Everything's sequential, 1, 2, 3, down to 8, everything's sequential. Here's my target. Now when I refresh, here's what's really neat, and this was not a possibility until recently. The record IDs always would have been in sync because it is using that as its key. Well, because I'm using the new primary key functionality, it was able to compare prod 1 with prod 1 and the short descriptions. Actually, now that I think about that, I may have to do a little more research on what nulls are not working, because I noticed some weirdness, but this is
in the normal database.
No, actually.
Maybe primary keys are usually not null. Maybe I didn't think about it when I.
And that's what I kind of figured, because typically your primary key, you don't like a null primary key. But hey, I like breaking things. So as we can see, somebody have a question or? So yeah, this is the one where it didn't work quite how I was expecting, but I'll dig into that a little more. But you can see my leaving QAs are still there. My do not sync did not come over. So, but the ones where they did match or you know, were not exceptions to my qualification did come over. Now, here was a one I did for whatever reason, say this originated in QA, but I want to sync from prod. Well, you can do that. So let's see. Here we go. That has an assigned to of prod with a bunch of bangs at the end. We run it again, and it synchronized it here, and the request IDs are not the same. So that's using the primary keys to make the match. And that's what we were kind of hoping to show with ITSM. I just didn't, because of the way the relationships, all the GUIDs would be different. There was no way to do a lookup and say, okay, give me that work order, work log entry, or a person work info, you know, whatever the case may be. So that is all I've got. We covered, you know, backing up to an ARX, synchronizing between the systems, and then the new functionality using the primary key that is no longer dependent on the request ID. Are we missing any questions there, fellas?
There were a few questions here, and I'm going to try to get to a couple of them here, but I'm going to ask Darius. Darius just joined.
Oh, wonderful.
He had an escalation, so I'm going to see Darius. Do we need to jump to you to give you 15, 20 minutes, or can you hang out for a little bit while I ask a couple of questions that came up in the chat?
No, we're good. Go ahead and escalation has been resolved. So
okay. So I'm looking here in the chat. Does it compare the contents of records? Joe D'Souza asked, hang on a minute. Do you intend to, so Amir says, do you intend to add to it a, quote, suppress filters on import like the BMC import tool has? Disable filters on import is great, but I'm always worried that if RRRchive script fails or gets interrupted, filters will be left disabled.
No, but it doesn't disable filters. It uses this option to bypass the filters on merge. So it doesn't update the filters. It does update the filters, however, when you if you have a delete filter set, because there is no option to bypass delete filters, and it's the same with what's it called now? When you set up archive forms and when you are doing audit forms, this is a bit of a problem because you can't bypass that functionality while doing a sync. So you have to disassociate the forms and things like this. So all the things that it does is logged in the log file, so you can always check what it did and restore it manually after.
Yep, and I have had that happen. So you can see here on the screen, I do have the disabled delete filter. And I have had that happen before where either I canceled the script or it crashed, my machine rebooted, probably Windows updates. And I had to go in and look for the filters that were modified around the time I ran it and just re-enabled them.
Okay, excellent. Joe's asking, what if you change the login ID? What if you change the login ID of the user on one of the systems, for example, when the last name changes or after being married or name change, etc.?
There is two things here. Archive doesn't compare the field or the data. It request ID or the primary key record, and it compares the modified date. So if the modified date is different, it will be migrated.
So if login ID was the primary key that was chosen, then that would actually cause the deletion of the old record and a creation of a new record with the new ID.
Yeah, but there is another caveat with the user form, because I don't know if in version 7.6 or something, or they added some kind of salt to the password field when you exported it through the API. So you can't just export it and import it. It's some kind of secret thing that happens in Remedy user and the AR import tool or whatever you use. But because we don't have access to this, we cannot actually migrate the passwords anymore. So it's a problem with the user form.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because the 8.1 upgrade to 20.02, I originally hoped to migrate users and all their passwords broke. My original version of this from years ago did have user in here, but I had to remove it. What I ended up doing is exporting an ARX through mid-tier, maybe user tool. No, you know what, I did run macro.
User tool works.
But yeah, I brought it through
fine.
Remedy provided tools, and then imported it with the import tool to bring over user data. That is one exception that you can't migrate, at least the password portion. You can migrate other fields. And actually I did, there is a skip field option, and I told this to skip the password. So once I had my people over there, I still wanted to sync, maybe they changed from a floating to a fixed license. I still wanted to synchronize that. I just left the password alone.
And if I remember correctly, the change that you're talking about, Misi, was actually BMC changed the hashing algorithm that was used for the password. So it wasn't really a salting perspective. It was that passwords that were hashed with the old algorithm couldn't be moved to a system with the new algorithm because the server doesn't do a decrypt or anything like that. It just rehashes and compares.
It's not related to that, actually. It's related to the fact that there is something in the client, the run macro or AR user or mid-tier, that kind of changes the password field when it goes out to the ARX file.
Yeah, my experience has been
so it's a client
similar
portion that is missing from.
Yep, on similar versions, I still have not been able to get it to work. So actually identical versions, because I had a customer recently there 1805, somewhere 1805, 1902. And we were I used the exact same scripts to refresh foundation data to the lower environments. And I tried to do the users and it had the same problem.
If you use this tool to create an ARX file and you export the same record from mid-tier to an ARX file, you can see that the password field doesn't match. So so something happens within mid-tier, within run macro or AR user that changes this. And I also think the import tool does an additional change. So you can't use a user ARX file and import it with this archive tool. So
interesting.
Okay, there's one more question that I'm going to take here, and then we'll get to Darius. And Amir asks, I suppose your primary key combo has to be unique, otherwise it would have unexpected results or probably wouldn't work. And yes, since it's a unique thing, I would assume it would have to be.
Yes, it has to be unique, but it doesn't it still. It will bring over one of the records. I think I don't quite. I was handling this when I implemented it, but I don't remember exactly what I did. So, but it should be unique. So typically, you would use a field or a field combination that has a unique index in place. So that will make sure of that.
Okay. And Joe D'Souza asked if the permissions are kept in sync.
They are based on the forms that are being included, yes, except for user. So that's the one caveat. Now we could add user to this and skip the password field. And actually somewhere I do have, and I'll include that in the update, is I have one CFG file, one configuration file that's just user, and it has skip password field for that use case.
Okay.
So technically what I did live broke my users because they are not in the user form. That is the one caveat. You have to jump through a few hoops to do them.
So Jason, let me ask the question about the user. If you do the skip password field, and let's say both systems just happen to already be in sync on who the users are, but not necessarily their permissions. By doing the skip password, would the password in the one that you're pushing it into stay in place, or does it become blank and you've got to go back and fix them?
I believe it leaves it alone.
It leaves it alone, but if it's a new record, it will get a blank password because we don't have a password.
Okay. Yeah,
right.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, guys. That's really great. Very cool tool. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead, and I think that's pretty much it. There's one more question in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and let's see. I'll remove me. Well, I can remove me from this. Well, maybe I'll just. You guys did such a great job. I'm gonna excuse you, and then I'm gonna go and find. I'm gonna find Darius here. Just a second.